Well, hello, SetJetters. Welcome to our YouTube channel. I'm Viv Smith, one of the co-founders of SetJetters, and I'm excited to have my fellow co-founder, Kate Edwards, here with me today. Hey, Kate.
Hey, how's it going?
Really good. I'm excited because you're going to take me back in time to the summer of '82. So can you tell me why we're time traveling back to this very specific time in history?
Well, I think for a lot of people who weren't around during that time, because there were a lot who were not, but for me, just to give you a sense of the context and why the summer of 1982 was such a big deal for us back then, especially people of my age. So I was 17 years old. I was going into the last year of high school, my senior year of high school. So I had the whole summer, and we had just had 5 years earlier Star Wars come out in 1977, and for our generation that was an explosion of interest, and suddenly the geeks were liberated. We're no longer pariahs. We're no longer, well, we kind of still were, but it kind of legitimized us, for those of us who loved science fiction and fantasy and all these other films like that. And because Star Wars came along, we had never seen anything like it. It was just completely out of the blue. And that spurred this incredible growth of films that were very special effects laden in the early 80s, well, actually well into the 80s and 90s. But what I think happened in 1982 is that what you saw is that even though Star Wars came out in 77, then we had Close Encounters of the Third Kind come out later in 77, then we had Superman in 78, which was also a big deal. We had The Empire Strikes Back in 1980, and then 1981 was Raiders of the Lost Ark. But still, for the most part, in each one of those years after Star Wars, we didn't see like a massive amount of films come out with, there were usually kind of these big tentpole premieres that kind of dominated the screens at that time. And of course, there were far fewer theaters in that era than there are now. But in 1982, I think what happened is that Hollywood was finally waking up and realizing that, wow, this is the kind of content people want. And for whatever reason, they all kind of hit the same rhythm. So in 1982, all of these films came out that were these huge special effects blockbusters that even today we still celebrate. It was kind of this really iconic era that kind of kickstarted what I think in some ways is still continuing today, which is just kind of the complete dominance of the summer blockbuster.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned about the impact of Star Wars. You know how there's these historical moments where people remember where they were. People remember where they were when 9/11 happened. I have family members and friends who are older than me. They remember going to Star Wars for the first time.
Absolutely. I mean, I still remember, like crystal clear, remember when my brother, one morning we were getting ready for school, and he came down the hallway and said, "Hey, have you heard of this thing called Star Wars? Like, they just said something about it on the radio." I'm like, I don't know, never heard of it before.
Wow. To think there's a moment in history when Kate Edwards knew nothing about Star Wars. So look, focusing back on summer of '82, I guess the question is, I think some people that are good at math can figure this out, but why are we talking about it now?
Well, I think, yeah, the obvious part is that it is the 40th anniversary. And so for those of us who are around, it's very nostalgic. But I think also for Hollywood and film in general, we're also celebrating quite a milestone in some of these films that have since that time, over the last 40 years, become utterly iconic. And some of them are considered really so groundbreaking and fundamental to the history of film. You think about all these films that came out in 1982, such as Blade Runner, E.T., Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, considered one of the best Star Trek films ever made. The Road Warrior, which was Mad Max 2, which really took this kind of more kind of indie feeling film, the original Mad Max from Australia, and really vaulted it into the global consciousness. Poltergeist, which is a really big Spielberg film, although it was directed by Tobe Hooper, but everyone says it's got Spielberg's hands all over it. The Thing, which is considered one of the best remakes of a movie ever. Tron, which was one of the first films, and actually that was a big deal too, is Tron using computer graphics and this whole computer digitized world that has since become such a fascination with so many people. The Dark Crystal as well came out in that same summer, which was also revolutionary. It's the first time we'd seen puppetry used in that kind of way in a full-length motion picture, with that kind of depth of story. And then of course Conan the Barbarian, Arnold Schwarzenegger was also kind of of vaulted into his fame far more than he had been prior to Conan. And these are just the geek films. There were a lot of other films that came out too during that summer, but these were the ones that really kind of stuck with a lot of us, and again were the ones that were kind of really heavily laden with special effects.
Yeah, they're certainly the ones that when you do a Google search of summer of '82 movies, those are the films that come up. That's kind of, I think, what people reference when they're talking about this glorious summer of film history. And it's interesting because some of it really has become iconic and so important to film's history. I've studied some of these. They've in film school, and I remember studying Tron. They brought up sections of it, and they kind of, this early style of graphic animation and how it was so instrumental to kind of what was to come.
Yeah, and you think about even a film like Blade Runner, because I'll never forget seeing it for the first time when it came out, and it was such an antithesis of everything else that had come out that summer. Because you think about E.T. and Poltergeist and these very suburban settings, or Tron, which was very Disneyfied, so it was kind of a positive hero story and things like that. I mean, even though The Thing was a horror story, but we'd seen that story before, whereas Blade Runner, we'd never seen this at all. And the environment that was created in that film, just phenomenal work by Ridley Scott and his team. And of course, since then, that's become recognized as one of the best science fiction films ever made. Even 40 years later, a lot of people look back on that film as just being so incredibly well made. But at the time, it was so panned by critics, hardly anyone saw it. It was a box office bomb, so it was one of those films that needed the 40 years to really gather that cult following and attain the status it has today.
So look, coming back to kind of what we do, which is tell people where all of this stuff was shot. Some of it, of course, has been built inside of a computer. So what is set-jetting these films? What does that look like? That's
one of the challenges we have with films that rely heavily on special effects. So certainly a lot of the films I mentioned are great for set-jetting. We have in the SetJetters app, we've got E.T. and Blade Runner, Poltergeist, Tron, Rocky 3, which was obviously not much special effects, and The Thing as well. Those are some of the films from 1982 that you can easily find in the SetJetters app. And a lot of those are really fun because they're, certainly some of the ones are close into urban areas. If you want to go visit the Thing set, which is way up in British Columbia, that's going to be a bit more of a challenge, but hey, that's what some of us like to do. And then of course, some films like Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, virtually nothing of that film was filmed on a real location. It was all CG, which, I think it's worth noting too, which is one of the things that's really cool about 1982, is that it contained two films that were really the very, very beginning of the use of computer graphics in film. It was Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan, which contained the Genesis Effect computer graphics sequence, which was really one of the very first times computer graphics had been fully used in a movie. And then of course Tron with its computer graphics as well. And, I highly recommend for people, just a little plug here, if you've got Disney Plus, absolutely watch the series called Light and Magic about the evolution of Industrial Light and Magic, the special effects house that George Lucas created, because it's a really fascinating, and so much of it kind of pivots on this summer because a lot of their work is seen during the films of that summer. So that's a couple things I'd recommend. But in terms of set jetting, there's a lot of great scenes, like live scenes, that you can go visit from that summer. Awesome.
So Kate, what's your favorite from all of these films from 1982? What's your personal favorite recommendation?
Because of the nostalgia for me personally, I have to say, like, visiting the locations for E.T. and Poltergeist, because both were filmed in suburban Southern California. I grew up in suburban Southern California. So, the houses you see in like E.T. and Poltergeist are not too dissimilar from the house that I grew up in. And so it's very nostalgic for me. It looks kind of the same as where I grew up, which I think actually is one of the reasons why those films were so relatable to the audiences and were so popular, because it looks like somewhere that a lot of us have lived in, at least a lot of Americans, especially in suburbia. So I have that kind of emotional connection to the set. But the one place I'd really like to visit that I've never been is Outpost 31, which was the setting for The Thing, which was filmed way up in British Columbia, and it's kind of in the middle of nowhere near a small town of Stewart, BC. But I'd love to go there someday, but still haven't had a chance.
Yeah, cool. Well, for those that have, have, or they might be local and it's pretty close to you. Let us know. Please reach out on our social media. And the other thing I like to let our users know, I think most of them do, but you can actually submit scenes. So if we have missed a scene from one of your favorite movies or have missed a movie entirely, let us know. We'll get it in the app for you. There's a scene submission form inside of our app that you can find pretty easily. But also just reach out to us. Send us an email. Our emails are easy to find inside of the app. We're on social media at SetJetters. So reach out to us. Let us know if you've been to the Outpost. I don't know which way I'm pointing, but Kate's right there. And we'd love to hear from you. So download SetJetters, give it a go, and thanks for watching. Hi, it's Viv again. If you enjoyed this video interview, I am looking for more people to talk to. So if you know of anyone that's interested in visiting film locations, perhaps you love visiting film locations, shoot me an email at viv@setjetters.com.